I never believed the ocean held secrets, at least not the kind of secrets that would haunt you long after you stopped thinking about them. I always thought of the ocean as something indifferent, cold, vast, seemingly empty, a place where ships went missing, where deep-sea creatures lived in a world far removed from ours, where mysteries were born, but nothing truly sinister, just a void. But what I uncovered, what I found buried beneath those waves, changed everything. And in that moment, I could no longer look at the ocean the same way again. It started innocently enough. I had heard the rumors, whispers among researchers, a few odd documents I came across by accident, an old file that didn't quite add up. It didn't seem like anything at first, just a stray thread in a vast sea of information. But when I started pulling at it, I realized something wasn't right. The government, the same one we trust to protect us, had pulled back from deep-sea exploration decades ago. They stopped it. No more missions, no more research. They walked away from the ocean's depths and simply let it be. They said it was because of budget cuts. They said it was a matter of resources, or perhaps technology. But I knew that wasn't the real reason. There was something else, something they didn't want us to find. At first I thought it might be an accident, a mistake, a few classified files, a few unaccounted-for disappearances of oceanographers and researchers. But when I started looking closer, I saw the patterns. There was no denying it. The government wasn't stopping the exploration because they couldn't. They were stopping it because they had to. They had seen something beneath the surface, and what they found was something they could never let the public know. So I kept digging, following the trail, piecing together fragments of information. Old research papers, hushed conversations, unexplained disappearances. Everything kept pointing me toward the same truth, and every time I found another piece, the weight of it grew heavier. The further I went, the more I realized just how deep the lies went. No one was talking. No one was willing to admit the truth, but they all knew it. There was something down there. Something terrifying. Something alive. You may be wondering, how could something like that be kept a secret? How could a discovery so horrifying be buried for decades? The answer is simple. Because the truth is too dangerous to tell. What the government uncovered out there in the ocean's abyss was something that would make us question everything. It's not just the unknown, it's something far worse. They found something that, if the public ever knew about it, would shatter the foundation of everything we understand about our world, our history, and our very existence. The deeper I went into this rabbit hole, the more I came to understand just how far they were willing to go to keep it hidden. They tried to bury it, they tried to suppress it, but I was getting closer. Too close. I started to realize that the truth wasn't just a matter of science or discovery, it was a matter of survival. The government wasn't afraid of a few conspiracy theories or rumors getting out. No, what they were afraid of was panic. What they were hiding wasn't just dangerous, it was something that could destroy everything. And as I pieced the story together, I found myself asking the same question over and over. What are they really hiding down there? What was so terrifying that they couldn't let us see it? What was it that had been locked away in the ocean's depths for so long, only to be kept out of our reach? Why did they stop exploring? Why did they let the ocean remain unexplored, its mysteries untouched, its horrors hidden? I wish I could say that I was prepared for what I found. I wasn't. The closer I got to the truth, the more I realized that the ocean is not just a vast, empty expanse. It is a tomb, a graveyard, a place where the forgotten are buried, where the unimaginable waits in silence. And what they found down there, it's worse than anything I could have ever imagined. It's not just that the ocean holds secrets, it's that the ocean holds something ancient, something far beyond our understanding, and it's waiting. It's waiting for us to uncover it. But we're not ready. We can't be. The truth, once revealed, would change everything. The government knows this. That's why they stopped the research. That's why they're hiding it. What they found beneath the waves is something that should have stayed buried. And that's where my story begins. Because I found it. I found what they've been hiding all this time. I discovered the secret, and now I can't forget it. No one can. I didn't start this journey because I was looking for a horror story. I wasn't even sure I was going to find anything at all. I'm just an ordinary journalist, a writer, a researcher. I spend my days gathering information, connecting dots, and digging through records. Anything that could spark a new angle for the stories I'm working on. Most of the time it's pretty routine stuff. Crime stories, local scandals, environmental issues. Nothing that ever made me feel like I was on the edge of a cliff, looking down into something dark and unknowable. But that all changed when I came across a whisper. I remember exactly where I was when I first heard it, late at night, in a dusty old archive room at the local library, my usual space for sorting through old documents. You could say I had a thing for the obscure, the forgotten. Newspapers from the 1970s, old government reports, anything that felt like it held a hidden truth. I was working on a documentary about climate change and the impact of human activity on the oceans. Just another one of those environmental stories. But as I flipped through old research papers, I saw something that caught my eye, something that wasn't supposed to be there. An old government memo. It was buried between a series of reports on ocean pollution, its heading simply marked, Classified, Deep Sea Exploration, Termination. I remember my heart skipping a beat. Termination? Why would a government program that was supposed to protect and study the oceans be suddenly shut down without explanation? My curiosity got the better of me. I read the memo, and all it did was leave me with more questions than answers. It talked about funding issues. Yes, it mentioned equipment failure. Yes, but there was something off about it, as if there was something they weren't saying. I dug further. The deeper I went, the stranger things got. I pulled more documents, government emails, declassified notes from old oceanography teams, even a few personal accounts from researchers who had worked on deep-sea missions in the 80s and 90s. Each new piece of information was like a puzzle, but it felt wrong, like I was digging into something I wasn't supposed to, something that didn't want to be uncovered. Then I found the old footage. A film shot by an exploration team in the late 80s as they ventured into the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. The footage wasn't available to the public. It had been locked away in government archives for decades, its existence largely forgotten by everyone except a handful of officials. But I managed to track it down. The footage was grainy, shaky at times, but there was something so chilling about it. The crew had filmed everything, documenting their descent into the abyss. At first, it seemed like standard exploration. Strange creatures, dark waters, vast stretches of nothing. But then something caught the camera's lens. A shadow. It was brief, just a flicker in the corner of the frame. But the look in the eyes of the crew, their hushed voices, their nervous glances said everything. They had seen something, something that made them stop the mission cold. What they discovered down there wasn't just dangerous, it was terrifying. I didn't know it at the time, but I had crossed a line. I was no longer just looking for a story, I was looking for the truth, and I wasn't ready for what I would find. I suppose I should have known better. I've always been a curious person, maybe to a fault. When I was younger, I had a fascination with the sea. It wasn't the typical fascination most people had, with its beauty or mystery. No, it was the depths, the unknown. I remember watching documentaries about shipwrecks, ancient ruins, and strange creatures that lived far below the surface. I would stare at the screen for hours, imagining myself as part of those expeditions, delving into places where light couldn't reach, where the world was so old that time seemed to stand still. But something changed when I got older. Life got in the way, and the sea became just another thing I could only watch from afar. The fascination was there, but the danger, well, it became real, something I knew I had no business getting close to. But this story was different. It called to me. It was more than just a curiosity. It was an itch I couldn't scratch. And that's how I ended up where I am now, alone in a small room, sifting through documents that should have never seen the light of day, chasing a story that might have been better left untouched. The more I uncovered, the more I realized just how far this went. The government didn't just stop deep-sea exploration because of cost or resources. They stopped it because they found something in those depths, something that terrified them so much they had to bury it, along with everything else they didn't want us to know. What I found next would shatter everything I thought I knew about the ocean, about the world, about the lies they've been telling us. I just didn't realize how dangerous this journey would be, or how much I'd have to risk to uncover the truth. The deeper I dug, the more the atmosphere around me shifted. At first, it was subtle, a slight unease, a vague sense of something being off. It's hard to describe, but I could feel it pressing in on me, like the air was getting heavier. I could almost taste it on the back of my tongue, a metallic bitterness that settled in my mouth every time I reached for another file. I tried to shake it off. I was just being paranoid. After all, this was just research, right? I was just trying to find a story, trying to make sense of something the government had conveniently forgotten. But as I pulled more documents, one after the other, it started to feel like I was crossing some invisible line. Then my fingers brushed against something cold. It wasn't a paper, not a report, not even a file folder. It was a small clip of footage, tucked between two stacks of old government memos, as if it had been deliberately hidden. The case was old, the plastic cracked, the label barely readable. I could barely make out the words "top secret." My hands shook slightly as I held it up to the light. The air around me seemed to still, as if the room itself were holding its breath. I had no idea what I was about to witness, but there was no turning back now. The moment I slid it into the machine, I felt the weight of it. A strange tension, like the world was about to change. The footage flickered to life, grainy and distorted, but it didn't take long to see that this wasn't anything like the footage I had seen before from deep-sea missions. This was different. Something was wrong. The camera seemed to be drifting in the dark, the light barely piercing through the blackness of the ocean floor. For a long time I saw nothing but murky shadows, vague shapes that seemed to move or perhaps shift in the corner of the frame. I leaned forward, my heartbeat quickening. There was something more. Then I saw it. A shape in the distance, something large but not quite natural. It wasn't a shipwreck. It wasn't a coral reef. No, this was something else. The water around it seemed to pulse, undulating in a way that wasn't just from the current. It looked like the water itself was alive. As I watched, the shape grew clearer, and I realized with a jolt that it wasn't an object at all. It was a structure, towering, unnatural, and completely out of place. A monument, or a cage. Its edges were jagged, almost organic, as if it had been constructed by something that wasn't human. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The room was so quiet now that I could hear my own breath, shallow and unsteady. The footage continued, the camera moving closer to the structure. As it did, I could hear the faintest sound, something low, something vibrating, like an engine running deep under the ocean, a hum that reverberated through the bones. It wasn't a noise that belonged to any machine I knew. It felt ancient, unsettling. As the camera zoomed in on the structure, something else appeared, something dark, something that moved. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it was large. Too large to be any known ocean creature. And then I saw it, glimpses of strange forms, strange eyes that seemed to glimmer from the shadows beneath the water, blinking, watching. Something in me recoiled, but I couldn't look away. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn it off, but my hand wouldn't obey. I pressed my fingers into the table, feeling the cold wood beneath them, grounding myself. But that only made the sensation worse. The coldness seeped into my skin, a chill that was no longer just in the room but inside me. I leaned in closer to the screen, every muscle tense, my breath coming quicker now. And then I saw it. Something moving just beneath the surface, something large and shifting, its shape impossible to comprehend. It was like the water itself was alive, reacting to its presence, swirling and pulsing, as though trying to hide whatever this thing was. I could almost feel it, the weight of the ocean pressing down on me, the pressure of the depths closing in. The hum deepened, reverberating through my chest, and I could swear I felt the vibrations echo in the walls of the room. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, a living thing. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I had to be imagining it, right? But the footage was there, unrelenting. It showed something moving within the structure, something that didn't belong in the natural world, something far older, far more terrifying. And yet there was more, something worse that I couldn't yet see, something that lurked just beyond the range of the camera's light. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I had the strangest sensation that I wasn't alone. It felt like the room around me was closing in, the air getting thicker, the darkness outside pressing in on the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had just seen, it was still out there, watching, waiting. I reached for the mouse, my hands trembling, but as I tried to stop the footage, the screen flickered again, and for a split second I thought I saw something move, something behind me, a shadow perhaps. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just the isolation, the tension. But I couldn't. I couldn't let go of what I'd seen. I had to find out more. And that was when I knew what I had uncovered wasn't just a story. It was a warning that someone or something had wanted to keep hidden for so long. And now I was in too deep. The deeper I went, the closer I came to the truth. And the truth was something darker, something much more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. As I watched the footage unfold, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The camera moved slowly, almost aimlessly, through the dark waters, the light from the submersible flickering weakly. But something was down there. I couldn't tell what, not at first. Shapes, yes. Figures that didn't belong in the ocean. It was hard to process. My mind didn't want to accept what I was seeing. I leaned closer, pressing my forehead against the screen, trying to make sense of it. The camera zoomed in for a moment, and I saw it clearly. A massive structure, half submerged in the ocean floor. It looked like a building, too angular, too precise to be natural, its surface covered in strange markings, worn down by the salt and time. But what was more disturbing than the sight itself was the feeling that came over me. A deep, instinctive wrongness. Something about that structure didn't just belong in the ocean. It shouldn't exist at all. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I had to know more. I began to dig into the mission logs, the documents I had gathered. The more I read, the more questions piled up. I came across a name that kept popping up in nearly every mission report, Project Abyss. It was mentioned casually at first, a footnote in the documentation, but as I dug deeper, it became clear that it was anything but casual. The program was an anomaly. It had never been fully declassified, even though it was supposed to have ended decades ago. And with each new piece of information, I felt the same chill creeping up my spine. There was something about Project Abyss that no one wanted to talk about. But just as I was beginning to piece together a coherent story, something strange happened. My computer froze. The screen went black, and the soft hum of the machine ceased. I clicked the mouse, pressing keys, but nothing happened. Then faintly, whispers. I thought it was my imagination at first, just a trick of the mind, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like voices in the distance, just beyond my reach. It was like they were coming from the speakers, but it didn't make sense. There was nothing playing. There shouldn't have been anything at all. I moved away from the computer, but the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to follow me, echoing in the walls of the room. I turned off the machine, but still, the voices lingered. They weren't loud, but they were there, always just at the edge of hearing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Project Abyss. What could it have been? What had they discovered? The footage from the deep sea mission was clear, but I felt like there was something more, something hidden. I couldn't ignore the feeling that the government wasn't just hiding a story, they were hiding something far worse. Over the next few weeks, I tried to track down anyone who might know more about the project. Former scientists, researchers, engineers who had worked with the program. Most of them had vanished. The ones who didn't were either too scared to speak or claimed they had no memory of anything related to Project Abyss. But I did find one man, Dr. Stephen Grant, a former lead scientist involved in the program. He was old now, but I had my hopes. He knew something, I was certain of it. I finally reached out to him. He agreed to meet me, but only at night, at an abandoned diner just outside the city. I remember the way he spoke on the phone, his voice shaky, as though he was on the verge of breaking down. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said. "You have no idea what's down there." We set a time to meet, and I arrived early. The diner was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering, casting long shadows over the dusty tables. I waited, pacing back and forth, the tension in the air thickening with each passing minute. I knew this was it, the moment I'd finally uncover the truth. But as the minutes ticked by, something started to feel wrong. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up, expecting to see Dr. Grant walking through. But it wasn't him. It was a man I didn't recognize, dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows of the doorway. "Are you looking for Dr. Grant?" the man asked, his voice cold and calculated. I nodded, confusion creeping in. "Yes, I." Before I could finish, the man interrupted, his gaze piercing through me. "He won't be coming. Not tonight." I felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature in the room had dropped 10 degrees. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine, and in that moment, I realized I was alone. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly, but the man only smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been asking the wrong questions. You'll never find him." And with that, he turned and left, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft but unmistakable click. I stayed in that diner for hours, but Dr. Grant never showed. The police wouldn't talk about it when I called. They said there was no sign of him, no record of anyone matching the description I gave. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came a few days later when I received an anonymous tip. It was a single line of text, no sender, just a string of words. Project Abyss wasn't just about discovery, it was about containment. That was when everything shifted. I had been looking for answers, thinking I could uncover a hidden truth about the ocean. But now I knew I wasn't uncovering anything. I was being led deeper into a web, into something they never wanted anyone to find. I couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. So I did what any desperate person would do. I went to the government facility, the one that was supposed to house the remaining records from the program. It was isolated, locked down, heavily guarded. But I had to try. I knew this could be the last chance I had to uncover the truth. I slipped past the guards, made my way inside, and found the files I needed. But just as I was about to leave, ready to piece together everything I had learned, I heard something. It was soft at first, barely noticeable. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the hall behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It couldn't be. I turned around slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The hallway was empty, but then I heard it again, closer this time. Someone was coming. I didn't have much time. The door to the exit was in sight, but those footsteps were getting louder, closer. I had to make a decision. Would I run, or would I face whatever was chasing me into the dark? The freeze on my computer lasted for several minutes, an eternity in the silence that now filled the room. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant, unsure of what to do next. Then, just as I was about to give up and restart everything, the screen flickered back to life and the cursor blinked, an unsettling reminder that the machine was still processing something. But it wasn't just the computer that had been frozen. Something had shifted in the air around me, a coldness that crept up my spine and made my breath feel shallow. I felt watched. It was as if the shadows in the corners of the room were growing, stretching toward me. A gnawing sensation of dread had taken root deep within my chest, and for the first time I began to question what I was really dealing with. I had thought this was just a story, but it was far worse. I pushed forward. I had to know what Project Abyss was really about. I had to find the truth, even if it meant risking everything. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and forced myself to dig deeper into the files. Each page I read felt like it was pulling me further away from anything I knew to be real. The reports started to describe things that could only be described as unnatural. The missions that were supposedly the focus of Project Abyss weren't about research. They weren't about ocean life or climate studies. They were about something far darker. What they had found in the deep ocean was not just a new species or an anomaly of nature. It was a living, breathing organism that defied every rule of biology. The reports spoke of creatures that shouldn't exist, mutations of life that were far beyond anything science could explain. These were no ordinary deep-sea creatures, no strange fish or lost species. No, these were something else. They were massive, their bodies twisted and gnarled in ways that nature itself wouldn't allow. Some had limbs that shouldn't have been able to move. Others had eyes that glowed from within, as if they were alive with an eerie intelligence. And they weren't just living, they were thriving. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I continued to read, one chilling fact became apparent. These creatures, whatever they were, had been in contact with something, or someone, and that something was in the deep, too. What had been found in the farthest reaches of the ocean, what the government had sealed away and buried in classified files, was not just an unknown life form. It was a threat. A living threat so vast and ancient that the only way to stop it from escaping into the world above was to lock it away, forever. The true horror of Project Abyss lay not in the creatures themselves, but in what the government was hiding from the world. The knowledge that there was something older, something far more dangerous, deep beneath the waves, a presence. And the creatures they found, they were only the surface of what had been awakened. The government knew it. They had seen the evidence, and they feared it. They feared what would happen if that presence, whatever it was, ever reached the surface. They had stopped exploring because they realized too late that the ocean wasn't empty. It wasn't waiting to be explored. It was a prison, and something had been set free. I sat there in shock, the weight of what I had uncovered crashing over me like a tidal wave. Every report, every file I had read was a warning. The government wasn't hiding these creatures out of fear of the unknown. They were hiding them because they knew what lay beneath the surface, and they were doing everything they could to keep us from finding out. But I had found out. And in that moment, I knew whatever was in those depths, whatever was waiting below, had already started moving. They had closed off the deep-sea missions for a reason. The ocean wasn't a safe place anymore. It was a ticking time bomb, and all the reports, all the records I had uncovered, they had led me to one terrifying conclusion. The deep ocean wasn't just hiding something, it was holding something back. And that thing, it was waking up. As I read further, the pieces began to fit together in a way I could no longer ignore. These creatures were not just terrifying because of their size, their grotesque forms, or their unnatural appearance. No, they were terrifying because they were intelligent, far more intelligent than anything we could comprehend. And what made it worse was the fact that they had been living beneath the ocean, unseen and unknown to humanity, for centuries, perhaps even longer. I had thought the stories I'd uncovered were just fragments, anomalies. But the more I pieced them together, the more I realized that this was not some random event or accident of nature. These creatures, these beings, had existed in the deep for so long, hiding from us, manipulating their environment in ways we could never hope to understand. And the government knew. They had known for decades, perhaps longer. But they didn't just fear these creatures. They feared what would happen if the public ever found out. Why? Because they were not just creatures of the deep. They were a force that could change everything. One of the most chilling reports I found described an incident that had taken place many years ago. A group of scientists had been part of an underwater expedition to a remote part of the ocean floor, an area that had been marked off-limits for decades. They were sent to capture evidence of a new species, but what they found instead was something much darker. The footage they captured, though blurred and incomplete, showed the team's final moments. The camera recorded images of massive creatures, twisted and malformed, but what stood out the most was the unmistakable sign of intelligence in their movements. The creatures didn't attack mindlessly. No, they watched. They studied the humans. The footage revealed a coordinated behavior that was, at the time, unimaginable. The creatures seemed to communicate with each other, using clicks and eerie, low-frequency growls that reverberated through the water. But it wasn't just the growls, the clicks, they were unnerving. It was as if they were sending a signal, something far more complex than simple predator-prey interaction. They weren't reacting like animals, they were reacting like thinkers. And the humans, despite their advanced technology, were nothing but prey in their eyes. I continued reading, my hands trembling as I flipped through pages, desperate to understand. It wasn't just the creatures themselves that terrified the government. The government feared what these beings represented, the possibility of an intelligence that had existed long before humanity had even begun to understand what intelligence was. They feared that if the world knew the truth, if the public ever learned that creatures like this had been hiding in the depths for centuries, it would shatter everything we thought we knew about our place in the world, our history, our understanding of evolution. They weren't just hiding the creatures, they were hiding the truth about us, about where we came from, about the terrifying possibility that we weren't alone on this planet, not in the way we had always thought. The government had worked tirelessly to keep this secret, to suppress any knowledge of these creatures, because they feared that once the truth was exposed, once the world knew, the balance would be irrevocably shifted. And they were right to be afraid. The more I uncovered, the more the true horror of it became clear. These creatures weren't just living in the deep. They had been there all along, quietly watching, waiting. And now, they were becoming aware of us. Aware that we were trying to uncover their existence. The report spoke of strange disturbances, electrical malfunctions, equipment failures, even disappearances of entire research teams. And as I read through the accounts, it became clear that these creatures weren't just waiting, they were actively hunting. Not for food, not out of instinct, but because they knew we were a threat. One particular entry in the mission logs described a failed attempt to capture one of the creatures. The footage was haunting, chaotic. The team had used a massive net designed to trap large sea creatures, and the moment they lowered it into the depths, the camera showed a shadow moving just beyond the light. At first, it was just a blur, something moving too fast for the human eye to follow. But then the camera stabilized and focused. That's when they saw it. A massive creature, its body long and serpentine, its skin almost translucent, revealing the eerie movement of veins beneath the surface. But what struck the team the most was its eyes. Those eyes. Cold, intelligent, and unwavering. It wasn't just looking at them, it was studying them, understanding them. And just before the camera cut off, you could hear the unmistakable sound of sharp clicks, like some kind of signal being sent. And then, in an instant, the creature disappeared back into the darkness. The net, still floating in the water, was left empty, and the research team, they never came back. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. The pieces were all there, but there was something else, a final, horrifying realization. The government had not only hidden the creatures, they had destroyed all evidence of them. All the failed missions, all the disappearances, erased. The footage I had uncovered wasn't even the worst of it. What I had found was just a fragment, an anomaly in a sea of hidden truths. The truth was buried, covered up, never to be spoken of again. And the terrifying thing was that they weren't just hiding these creatures. They were protecting them. Protecting us from the truth. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep this went. How far the government had gone to make sure that no one at all, would ever know the real reason they stopped deep-sea exploration. The creatures weren't just out there. They were waiting. And I was the one who had started to uncover it all. I was the one who had pulled the string that was starting to unravel the greatest secret the world had ever known. And now I could feel it. The danger. It was coming for me. As I dug deeper into the classified files, a chilling realization began to settle in. A realization that went beyond the creatures themselves. The government's cover-up wasn't just about preventing panic. No, it was about power. The more I pieced together the details of Project Abyss, the more it became clear that this wasn't merely about studying the ocean or protecting the public. They were after something much darker. They had been trying to control the ocean. They were attempting to harness these ancient, intelligent creatures for their own gain, to use them as a weapon. The mission reports were littered with evidence of failed experiments, procedures that should never have been attempted. They had tried to capture the creatures, to study them, but their efforts had been disastrous. Each time, something went wrong. The creatures fought back, not just with brute strength, but with an intelligence that the scientists couldn't understand. The footage showed military personnel attempting to capture one of them, one of the larger creatures, by ensnaring it in a massive underwater net. The creature didn't just break free. It disappeared into the water with an unnatural speed, as though it had melded with the ocean itself. It wasn't just a predator. It was something far more elusive, something that could vanish into the depths, leaving no trace behind. They couldn't control it. They couldn't even contain it. As I read through the reports, I saw a pattern emerging. These creatures weren't just living beings. They were connected to something greater, something the government had not only underestimated, but had no hope of controlling. There were mentions of strange phenomena occurring at the depths where these creatures lived. Electromagnetic disturbances, unexplainable temperature drops, and what seemed like an energy that the creatures emitted. It was as if they weren't simply surviving in the ocean, but feeding off it, manipulating the very fabric of the water around them. And that energy, it wasn't just powerful, it was dangerous. I found one document, buried deep in the files, that sent a chill down my spine. It was an internal report, written by a scientist who had been part of the early stages of the project. It read, "We cannot continue the project. The energy these creatures produce is too volatile. There is no telling what might happen if we push them further." But it wasn't just about the creatures. It was what lay beneath them, beneath the ocean itself, that had caused them to stop the research. The ocean, it wasn't just a body of water. It was a force, an ancient, unfathomable force that had its own rules, its own mind, its own power. The government had wanted to control it, to harness it, to use it for weapons, for power. But the deeper they went, the more they realized they were playing with something they didn't fully understand. They had underestimated the ocean, and in doing so they had awakened something far worse than they could have ever imagined. The reports continued to describe their attempts to study the energy beneath the ocean, using highly classified technology to tap into it, to measure its effects. But every experiment had ended in failure. Every time they thought they were getting closer to understanding the source of the power, something went wrong. The creatures which seemed to be attuned to this energy would react, often violently, as though they were protecting something. But no one knew what that was. I had a moment of clarity as I pieced the information together. These creatures weren't just animals, or even monsters. They were guards. They were the protectors of the ocean's secrets. And the government had made a grave mistake in thinking they could control them. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that the ocean wasn't just hiding physical monsters. It was hiding something far more dangerous, something powerful, something older than humanity. And the government had been trying to harness it, to bend it to their will. But the ocean, the creatures, the energy beneath the surface, they didn't belong to us. The ocean had its own laws, its own ancient forces, and no matter how much power the government had, no matter how much they tried to control it, they would never own it. It was at this moment, as I sat in that dimly lit room, surrounded by these horrifying truths, that I realized the magnitude of what I was dealing with. I wasn't just uncovering a government cover-up. I was uncovering a war between mankind and the very forces of nature. A war that had been hidden for decades, but one that was far from over. I couldn't turn back now. There was too much at stake. But as I sat there reading through the final reports, I heard something, a sound. Faint at first, but unmistakable. A low, echoing hum. It was almost like the sound of the ocean itself. But it wasn't coming from the computer. It was coming from behind me. I froze. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but the hum was growing louder. It vibrated through the walls, the floor, the very air around me. It was as if the ocean had followed me, had somehow found its way into the room with me. My skin prickled with dread as the noise intensified. My heart raced. I stood up, my eyes scanning the room, my mind racing with thoughts of what it could be. Was I imagining it? Was it just the weight of the information I had uncovered finally starting to break me? And then, from somewhere deep within the walls, came a click, sharp, deliberate, like the sound of a sonar ping bouncing off the surface of the ocean. The hum stopped. Silence followed. But that silence, it was far more terrifying than any noise. As I continued to piece the pieces together, one thing became clear. I was reaching the heart of something dark, something terrifying, and I couldn't turn back. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous the truth became. It was no longer just about the creatures. No, what I was about to learn would tear away the veil that had hidden not just the ocean's mysteries, but the government's deepest, most horrifying secrets. I had discovered the location of one of the last remaining government facilities dedicated to Project Abyss. A facility hidden deep within the ocean, located miles away from any known land. A place so remote that if something went wrong, no one would be able to help. The reports had alluded to this facility, describing it as a research outpost, a place where the experiments continued despite the failures. The further I read, the clearer it became that this facility was more than just a research station. It was a holding ground, a place where the creatures, those ancient and intelligent beings, were being kept under some form of containment. But the truth was far worse than I could have ever imagined. I had to see it for myself. So I went. I traveled to the facility, determined to uncover whatever the government had been hiding. I reached the deepest part of the compound, my heart pounding in my chest. The place was cold, the air thick with a metallic stench, the walls lined with pipes and old machinery. There was a sense of isolation here, a sense of being miles away from anything human. And then I found it. I couldn't believe my eyes. These creatures weren't just alive, they were thriving. The room before me was vast, and it stretched down into a black abyss. Inside, massive tanks, stretching from floor to ceiling, held the creatures in suspended animation. But what chilled me to the core was the sight of them, thriving. The water in the tanks seemed to pulse, shifting as if alive. The creatures' eyes glowed faintly, and even through the glass, I could feel their intelligence, like a heavy pressure, as if they were aware of me, aware that I had come too close. The walls shook suddenly, and I could hear a low, rumbling growl that seemed to echo through the facility. It wasn't just a noise, it was a warning. I backed away, but before I could take another step, I heard it again, closer this time. The water in the tanks began to churn violently, and a sound that I can only describe as a crackling pulse filled the room. The creatures were awake, and they were no longer contained. I was running out of time. The walls trembled again, and I could feel the ground beneath me shift as if the very ocean itself was pressing in. I was trapped, caught between these ancient creatures and a government that would do anything to keep the truth buried. My pulse raced as I realized that these creatures were no accident. They were no mere monsters of the deep. They had been there, long before us, perhaps even before life on Earth as we knew it. And the government had known all along, had been trying to harness their power for their own gain. But they had underestimated one thing. The ocean doesn't belong to us. As I moved through the crumbling facility, I came across more evidence, shocking footage of failed experiments, military operations gone horribly wrong, and then the chilling final piece of the puzzle, a document outlining plans to unleash these creatures into the world as weapons of mass destruction. They had been studying these creatures not just to understand them, but to control them. They thought they could control something that had existed long before humanity ever had. But now, as I stood there watching them stir in their tanks, I realized something much darker. These creatures didn't belong to anyone. Not the government, not the military, not us. They were beyond us, and the moment we tried to control them, they would break free. I turned to leave, but as I moved through the corridors, I felt it, the unmistakable feeling that I was no longer alone. The air seemed to grow heavier, the sounds of the facility now drowned out by a rising rumble. And then, in the distance, I heard it again. The growl. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the tanks. It was coming from the shadows, from behind me. I was being hunted. I ran. I ran with everything I had, but no matter how fast I moved, I could feel them getting closer. I had to escape. But as I sprinted down the narrow hallways, I knew that the ocean was no longer just a body of water. It was something alive, something ancient, and it was now coming for me. I was close to the exit, so close. And then I heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They were closing in. Whatever these creatures were, they were no longer confined to the ocean depths. They were here. They were hunting me. And if I didn't get out, everything I knew would be destroyed. What I found beneath the ocean wasn't just about creatures that shouldn't exist. It was about something far bigger. It was about the power the government had tried to control, and the terrifying reality that they had unleashed something they couldn't put back. I don't know how much longer I have. They're closing in, but I am the only one who knows the truth now. And if I'm lucky enough to get out alive, I'll never look at the ocean the same way again. Because I know now what's beneath the surface is far worse than we ever imagined. I should have known it was too late to turn back, but there was no time for second thoughts now. As I stood there, in that cold, sterile room beneath the ocean's surface, I understood with sickening clarity what the government had been hiding for so long. The creatures, those horrors lurking in the depths, weren't simply survivors of a forgotten era. No, they were something else, something far older than humanity and far more dangerous than anything we could comprehend. And these creatures, they weren't in those tanks just for observation. They were experiments. But not in the way we think of experiments. These beings were being studied for what they could offer. The government wasn't just interested in their biology or their intelligence. They were trying to harness the very power that kept them alive, power that could change everything. What I found in that facility wasn't just research. It was a vault, a tomb of secrets buried beneath the ocean. I could see it now, laid out in front of me, a hidden agenda centuries in the making. The creatures weren't just being held captive. They were being controlled, or at least the government had tried to control them. But something went wrong. Those tanks, they weren't for containment. They were for study, yes, but they were also a way to extract that power. The creatures had something the government needed. The government had been desperate to control the forces that made these creatures thrive, to learn how to tap into the ocean's energy, the raw, unfathomable force they had tapped into for millennia. But they hadn't counted on one thing. The creatures were different than what they thought. They had learned how to manipulate the environment around them. They had evolved not just biologically, but mentally. They were adapting, becoming more than just animals. They were becoming something else entirely. And when the government tried to exploit that power, they triggered something ancient, something that was never meant to be disturbed. I found the final piece of the puzzle in a set of encrypted files, hidden deep within the archives. What it revealed made my blood run cold. The government didn't just fear what these creatures were, they feared what they represented. These creatures were connected to the ocean's deepest, most ancient forces, forces that could reshape the earth itself, capable of altering reality as we knew it. And worse, they weren't alone. The ocean, it turns out, is not just a body of water. It is a doorway, a threshold to something far darker than we could ever imagine. The creatures are guardians, protectors of something buried deep within the ocean's crust. Something ancient, something so old it predates everything we know about life, about time itself. And if that power were ever to be unlocked, if it were ever to be unleashed, civilization as we know it would cease to exist. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we've never really known the ocean. We've always seen it as a mystery, a vast unknown waiting to be explored. But what we don't realize is that the ocean has always been hiding something, something we were never meant to discover. It's not just a place of mystery or wonder, it's a place of unimaginable horror. I couldn't stay there any longer. The walls of the facility seemed to close in on me. I felt the weight of something darker pressing down, like a storm gathering beneath the surface. The creatures, they weren't just animals, they were sentinels, guardians, and they had felt my presence. I could hear the faint rumblings now, vibrations in the air, the hum of something alive. As I turned to leave, my heart racing, I felt it. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, sharply. A low rhythmic thrum filled the space, and then I heard it. That growl, that clicking sound, not from the tanks, but from somewhere deeper, closer. They were coming. I sprinted down the narrow hallway, my breath coming in short gasps, my footsteps echoing off the cold metal floors. I had to get out. I had to warn everyone, somehow. But as I reached the exit, something slammed into the door behind me. The sound was deafening, a violent thud that rattled the entire station. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. I knew I didn't have much time left. I stumbled into the control room, breathless, my hands shaking as I frantically tried to activate the emergency override. The door opened just as I heard the unmistakable sound of something crashing through the walls behind me. It was too late. They were here. I barely made it out. I don't know how, but I did. Barely. I escaped, but as I fled, the horror of what I had uncovered stayed with me. I could feel it, crawling beneath my skin, following me. It wasn't over. The world wasn't ready for what lay beneath the surface. We were never meant to know the truth about the ocean, but now I knew, and soon the world would too. As I look back, I can only wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stumbled across those files, if I hadn't discovered what's really down there. But it's too late to stop now. The creatures are still down there, waiting. And who knows, maybe the government's not the only one watching. I'm the only one left who knows the truth. But I'm starting to think maybe that's a curse, not a gift. The ocean holds something far worse than we could ever imagine. And when the world finally learns the truth, when they see what's been hidden for so long, I don't think we'll be able to stop it. And I fear that in the end, we were never meant to. I stood frozen, staring at the horrors I had uncovered, the truth sinking in like a stone in my chest. Everything the government had told us, everything we had been taught to believe about the ocean, about the creatures lurking beneath the surface, had been a lie. They weren't just hidden away to protect us from panic. No, they were kept from us because the government feared what would happen if the world learned the truth. The ocean, it isn't just a vast expanse of water. It is a prison, a labyrinth of ancient power that we are barely equipped to understand, let alone control. And what lies beneath the surface is not simply waiting to be discovered. It's watching, waiting for us to uncover something we were never meant to know. The creatures, they were the least of it. The real horror is what they were guarding, what they were protecting. I thought that by exposing this, I'd uncover the secrets of a buried conspiracy, that I could show the world the hidden agenda of those in power. But what I found, what I uncovered, was far worse than I could have ever imagined. There is something out there, deeper than we can go, darker than we can comprehend. Something so ancient, so powerful that we are nothing more than ants beneath its gaze. What's worse, it's not just hiding anymore, it's waking up. But that's not the end of the story. Oh no, what I've uncovered is just the tip of the iceberg. The deeper we go, the worse it gets. There are more secrets, more terrifying truths lurking beneath the waves, just waiting to be exposed. The government doesn't want us to know what's down there, and neither do the creatures. And as much as I want to walk away, as much as I want to leave this nightmare behind, I can't. I'll never stop searching for the truth, will you? Stay tuned, because what I've uncovered so far is nothing compared to what's to come. The real horror is just beginning. And next time, you won't believe what I found when I went back.